How many of y'all, can you raise your hand if you've met me before? So, for those of you who haven't met me before, you won't know this, but you can ask the people who have met me before. That's part of my rider, and I don't travel unless there's a marching band. So, I appreciate the school for making that possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here tonight. Awesome. One more applause for the night. So, I started writing books when I was a pretty young kid. I was right out of college when I started trying to write my first book. And it was going to be this book about a children's hospital, and I was writing it because I had recently been a student chaplain at a children's hospital. I worked at a children's hospital in Ohio for about 5 months, and I met a lot of sick and dying kids while I was there and a lot of their families, and it had a really profound impact on me and the way I thought about human life, including that I dropped out of divinity school. But one of the, side note, my computer says this machine kills fascists, and I went to the, which is it's a Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie had that on his guitar, and then of course, the magic of the internet has facilitated all kinds of revolutions around the world that have, taken down fascist dictatorships. I don't think of it as a political statement, really. I just think of it as an acknowledgement of what the internet does. But the guys at the security in the airport this morning didn't.
Oh no!
And they were like, "What's that?" And I was like, "It's a vinyl sticker on my computer that references a Woody Guthrie quote from the 1930s." And he was like, "Well, what's it about? Like, is your computer special?" And I was like, "No, it's all computers. The idea of computing, the idea of free information, makes all people equal and gives people agency where they didn't have any before, like Gaddafi is dead, and computers had at least a tiny bit of something to do with that," and he was not very convinced. So anyway, don't read that. It's not a political statement. I mean, I'm opposed to fascists. That's not too controversial. So I worked at this children's hospital, and forever after that, I was trying to write this story that was set at a children's hospital that was about this miserable hospital chaplain who was getting dumped by this girl, and it was like unambiguously about me. And the reason that it was about me was because I was trying to, I was traumatized, I was hurt by the things that I saw and my inability to process them. Like, I was pretty young, I was 21, so it was really, really hard for me to contextualize the illness and death of young people in a way that could make my world make sense at all. I mean, it was really hard to find any kind of worldview that wasn't completely nihilistic, that could also allow for the randomness and arbitrariness of the things that I'd seen when I worked there. And I think I was really haunted by that. And instead of making my writing really good, unfortunately it made my writing really bad. So I put it aside and I wrote the novel Looking for Alaska. And I was trying to ask some of the same questions in Alaska, but I was asking them in a way that wasn't quite so difficult for me personally. And then I tried to write the children's hospital book again, and I put it aside and I wrote An Abundance of Catherines. And then I tried to write the children's hospital book again, and I put it aside and I started a video blog with my brother. And 4.5 years later, we still make videos, and 4.5 years later, I was still trying to write, I'm still trying to finish the stupid book. I had to go to a Wendy's in the Charlotte suburbs today because they had wireless, so that I could email something to my editor that is hopefully really the end. I have to stop changing things because they're printing the book now. When I started writing this book, it was in 2000. The internet looked a lot different than it does now. There are sentences in this book that kind of predate my relationship with the internet as a social phenomenon. Thanks to my dad, I was an early adopter of online communication, and I had friends online in the CompuServe days of the mid-90s, but I never lived inside of the internet the way that we all do now, or at least you know, nerd fighters do. I know there's some like older people here who probably don't think of themselves as living inside the internet, but for a lot of us, you know, a lot of our meaningful social interactions occur online, and I would argue strenuously, and I'm happy to have this argument if you want, that those social interactions are not any more or less meaningful than IRL interactions. I mean, there's lots of people are always like, oh, there's just a benefit to being face-to-face, and there is. There's also a benefit to not being face-to-face. You know, and so to me, there are different kinds of communication, but that doesn't make one less valuable than the other. It doesn't make friendships that you form online less valuable than friendships that you have in real life. And I've seen that in many ways over the course of my years living in the internet. And the interesting thing for me about living in the internet is that writing is the opposite of that, because writing is solitary, writing is quiet, writing is contemplative. Writing is nothing like that feeling of skimming along the surface of the water that one has as one, like, you know, scrolls through one's Tumblr feed. You know, like as an endless kind of, oh look, more information has arrived. And I need both. I need that feeling of skimming across the water. It's exciting, it's invigorating. There's something about the massive amount of information that's available on the internet that's incredibly exciting, that I think informs my writing in so many ways. I could never have written any of my novels if it weren't for the specific kind of research that the internet facilitates. There are lots of kinds of research that the internet is terrible at. I mean, there are lots of things that Google is really bad at. Google is really bad at telling you if your stomach hurts, what's wrong with you. Right? We've all had stomach aches, and we've all Googled stomach ache, and we've all been told that we have cancer. But there are lots of kinds of research that the internet is really good at, and those happen to be a lot of the kinds of research that I do in my books, although in this book in particular, I had to do a lot of stuff that isn't available on the internet. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about The Fault in Our Stars, and I'm going to read to you a little bit. But The Fault in Our Stars started out as this children's hospital book about this miserable alcoholic chaplain getting dumped by a girl. And then over time, it became more focused on the kids in the hospital. And then I started to move them out of the hospital because the children's hospital is a really crappy place to set a novel for a lot of reasons. And then it started to be about kids who form a club of chronically ill people. And then it started to be about one of these support groups. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of attending a support group, but I've attended a lot of them over the years. And they have a rhythm to them that is very helpful if you're in pain, but also very easy to make fun of, which is part of the reason that support groups work, I think, is that like you can both appreciate them and learn from them, and like the moment you leave, be like, that was lame. And then I met, and at some point during this time I'd met Esther Earle, who's a nerd fighter who had cancer. We can applaud for Esther. And like through knowing Esther, I was able to be a little bit less self-indulgent for the first time about the way I thought about illness and shorter lifespans, right? I had this problem, which is that I couldn't imagine a non-nihilistic worldview that would allow for the things that I had seen. And so I'm going to read to you a little bit about having that problem. First, I'm going to read to you from the epigraph of the book, which is from a made-up novel called An Imperial Affliction by Peter Van Houten, who's a made-up person. I stole that from The Great Gatsby, which is a better book than this one. As the tide washed in, the Dutch tulip man faced the ocean. Conjoiner, rejoinder, poisoner, concealer, revelator. Look at it, rising up and rising down, taking everything with it. What's that? Anna asked. Water, the Dutchman said. Well, and time. I'm going to skip the author's note because it's annoying. I'm just going to go to the end. The author's note asks you to read this as a novel, even though, you know, many of you will ask me if it's autobiographical and whatever. All right. Late in the winter of my 16th year, my mother decided I was depressed, presumably because I rarely left the house, spent quite a lot of time in bed, read the same book over and over, ate infrequently, and devoted quite a bit of my abundant free time to thinking about death. Whenever you read a cancer booklet or website or whatever, they always list depression among the side effects of cancer. But in fact, depression is not a side effect of cancer. Depression is a side effect of dying. Cancer is also a side effect of dying. Almost everything is, actually. But my mom believed I was depressed, so she took me to see my regular Dr. Jim, who agreed that I was veritably swimming in a paralyzing and totally clinical depression, and that therefore my meds should be adjusted, and also I should attend a weekly support group. The support group featured a rotating cast of characters in various states of tumor-driven unwellness. Why did the cast rotate? A side effect of dying. The support group, of course, was depressing as hell. It met every Wednesday in the basement of a stone-walled Episcopal church shaped like a cross. We all sat in the middle, we all sat right in the middle of the cross, where the two boards would have met, where the heart of Jesus would have been. I noticed that because Patrick, the support group leader and only person over 18 in the room, talked about the heart of Jesus every freaking meeting, all about how we as young cancer survivors were sitting right in Jesus' very sacred heart and whatever. So here's how it went in God's heart. The 6 or 7 or 10 of us walked or wheeled in, grazed at a decrepit selection of cookies and lemonade, sat down in the circle of trust, and listened to Patrick recount for the 1,000th time his depressingly miserable life story. How he had cancer in his balls, and they thought he was going to die, but then he didn't die, and now here he is, a full-grown adult in a church basement in the 137th nicest city in America, divorced, addicted to video games, mostly friendless, eking out a meager living by exploiting his cancer-tastic past, slowly working his way toward a master's degree that will not improve his career prospects, waiting, as we all do, for the sword of Damocles to give him the relief that he escaped lo those many years ago. I'm not done. Lo those many years ago when cancer took both of his nuts but spared what only the most generous soul might call his life. I'd like to accept those applause on my behalf, but it's all Hazel. So that's Hazel Grace Lancaster, whom you just met, who has originally cancer elsewhere in her body that has since spread to her lungs, and metastatic cancer is usually considered incurable. Although in Hazel's case, and in the case of some people who have certain metastatic tumors, she takes a drug, which is called phalanxafor, which is made up, but there are drugs like it that are in the market for very specific tumors, that controls her tumor growth without ever curing her. That basically allows her, at least for now, to live with very limited disease progression. But she is quite, she's definitely disabled as a result of her disease, so she has to carry around an oxygen tank all the time, and she has a nasal cannula that goes into her nose that drizzles oxygen into her nose and makes it much easier for her to breathe because her lungs aren't very good at breathing, and they periodically fill up with fluid, which can cause pneumonia and all kinds of life-threatening stuff. So Hazel goes to this support group, and as you might notice, she doesn't like it. And she meets a boy named Isaac there, who has lost one eye to cancer when he was a kid, and now, 10 years later, has had this fantastically improbable recurrence of cancer, and it's, in this scene, it becomes clear that he's going to have to lose his second eye, which, if you're keeping track at home, means that he will be blind. So she goes to, I'm trying to be funny about this because all the kids I've ever known who were sick were funny. Not in like oh, I'm so wise because I have cancer and cancer has given me this sense of humor that regular people don't have, and I can see deeper into the souls of others. And they're just regular people, and regular people are pretty funny. So I'm going to read to you this second scene and then discuss it a little bit and then take some of your questions. So she goes to support group for a few weeks. She meets this kid, Isaac, and this is the scene where she meets Augustus Waters, who's the other main character of the novel. This is going to be a little awkward because I'm a man and I'm reading from the perspective of a young woman, and she thinks this guy's hot, so just deal with it. Yeah. I went to support group for the same reason that I once allowed nurses with a mere 18 months of graduate education to poison me with exotically named chemicals. I wanted to make my parents happy. There's only one thing in this world shittier than biting it from cancer when you're 16, and that's having a kid who bites it from cancer. So Mom pulled into the circular driveway behind the church at 4:56. I pretended to fiddle with my oxygen tank for a second, just to kill time. Do you want me to carry it for you? No, it's fine, I said. The cylindrical green tank only weighed a few pounds, and I had this steel cart that I could use to wheel it around behind me. It delivered 2 liters of oxygen to me each minute through a cannula, a transparent tube that split just beneath my neck, wrapped behind my ears, and then reunited in my nostrils. The contraption was necessary because my lungs sucked at being lungs. I love you, she said as I got out. You too, Mom, see you at 6. Make friends, she said through the rolled down window as I walked away. Sorry, I thought I saw a typo and I freaked out, but I didn't. Okay. I didn't want to take the elevator because taking the elevator was kind of a last day's sort of activity in support group, so I took the stairs. I grabbed a cookie and poured some lemonade into a Dixie cup and then turned around. Upaway was staring at me. I was quite sure I'd never seen him before. Long and leanly muscular, he dwarfed the molded plastic elementary school chair he was sitting in. Mahogany hair, straight and short. He looked my age, maybe a year older, and he sat with his tailbone against the edge of the chair, his posture aggressively poor, one hand half in a pocket of dark jeans. I looked away, suddenly conscious of my myriad insufficiencies, and yet, as I cut a glance back to him, his eyes were still on me. It occurred to me why they call it eye contact. I walked into the circle and sat down next to Isaac, 2 seats away from the boy. I glanced again. He was still watching me. Look, let me just say it, he was hot. A non-hot boy stares at you, and it is at best awkward, and at worst a form of assault. But a hot boy, that's something else. I pulled out my phone and clicked it so it would display the time, 4:59. The circle filled in with the unlucky 12 to 18s, and then Patrick started us out with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The guy was still staring at me. I felt rather blushy. Finally, I decided that the proper strategy was just to stare back. I mean, boys don't have a monopoly on the staring business, after all. So I looked him over as Patrick acknowledged for the 1,000th time his balllessness, etc. And soon enough, it was a staring contest. After a while, the boy smiled, and then finally his blue eyes glanced away. When he looked back at me, I flicked my eyebrows up to say, I win. He shrugged. Patrick continued, and then finally it was time for the introductions. Isaac, perhaps you'd like to go first today. I know you're facing a challenging time. Yeah, Isaac said. I'm Isaac, I'm 17, and it's looking like I'm going to have to get surgery in a couple weeks, after which I'll be blind. Not to complain or anything, because I know a lot of us have it a lot worse, but yeah, I mean, being blind does sort of suck. My girlfriend helps, though, and friends like Augustus. He nodded toward the boy, who now had a name. So yeah, Isaac continued. He was looking at his hands, which he'd folded into each other like the top of a teepee. There's nothing you can do about it. We're here for you, Isaac, Patrick said. Let Isaac hear it, guys. And then we all, in a monotone, said, we're here for you, Isaac. Michael was next. He was 12. He had leukemia. He'd always had leukemia. He said he was okay, but he'd taken the elevator. Lyda was 16 and pretty enough to be the object of the hot boy's eye. She was a regular in a long remission from I don't have to say these things, I just write them. Cancer of the appendix, which I had not previously known existed. She said, and she said every other time I'd attended support group, that she felt strong, which felt like bragging to me as the oxygen-drizzling nubs tickled my nostrils. There were 5 others before they got to him. He smiled a little when his turn came. His voice was low, smoky. My name's Augustus Waters, he said. I'm 17. I had a little touch of osteosarcoma about 1.5 years ago, but I'm just here today at Isaac's request. And how are you feeling? Asked Patrick. Oh, I'm grand, Augustus Waters smiled with the corner of his mouth. I'm on a roller coaster that only goes up, friend. When it was my turn, I said, my name is Hazel, I'm 16, thyroid with mets in my lungs, and I'm okay. The hour proceeded at pace. Fights were recounted, battles won amid wars sure to be lost. Hope was clung to, families were both celebrated and denounced. It was agreed that friends just didn't get it. Neither Augustus Waters nor I spoke again until Patrick said, "Augustus, perhaps you'd like to share your fears with the group." "My fears?" "Yeah. I fear oblivion," he said without a moment's pause. "I fear it like the proverbial blind man who's afraid of the dark." "Too soon," Isaac said, cracking a smile. "Oh, is that insensitive?" Augustus asked. "I'm sorry, I can be really blind to other people's feelings." Isaac was laughing, but Patrick raised a chastening finger and said, "Augustus, please, let's return to you and to your struggles. You said you fear oblivion?" "I did," Augustus answered. Patrick seemed lost. Would anyone like to speak to that? I hadn't been in proper school in 3 years. My parents were my 2 best friends. My 3rd best friend was an author who did not know I existed. I was a fairly shy person, not the hand-raising type. And yet, just this once, I decided to speak. I half raised my hand, and Patrick, his delight evident, immediately said, "Hazel." I was, I'm sure he assumed, opening up, becoming part of the group. I looked over at Augustus Waters, who looked back at me. You could almost see through his eyes, they were so blue. "There will come a time," I said, "when all of us are dead. All of us. There will come a time when there are no human beings remaining to remember that anyone ever existed or that our species ever did anything. There will be no one left to remember Aristotle or Cleopatra, let alone you. Everything that we did and built and wrote and thought and discovered will be forgotten, and all of this," I gestured encompassingly, "will have been for naught. Maybe that time is coming soon, and maybe it's millions of years away, but even if we survive the collapse of our sun, we will not survive forever, because there was time before organisms experienced consciousness, and there will be time after. And if the inevitability of human oblivion worries you, I encourage you to ignore it, because God knows that's what everyone else does." I learned this from my aforementioned 3rd best friend, Peter Van Houten, the reclusive author of An Imperial Affliction, the book that was as close a thing as I had to scripture. Peter Van Houten was the only person I'd ever come across who seemed to A, understand what it's like to be dying, and B, not have died. After I finished, there was quite a long period of silence as I watched a smile spread all the way across Augustus Waters' face. Not the little crooked smile of the boy trying to be sexy while he stared at me, but his real smile, too big for his face. "Damn," Augustus said quietly. "Aren't you something else?"